chums, all aboard the Regret Express. I'll be your conductor, you can call me Sadness Bad Choices. That's my Sunday name, I just go by Oops to my friends. I see here you've booked a one-way express ticket to Why Did I Do This Land via the beautiful vistas of Oh bugger. Strap in and enjoy the ride, cause I sure won't. Hi guys, it's Leanne and welcome back to a new video. I know that you know from the title that this is my mid-year freakout tag, but what you might not know is just how accurate that title is this year. And it seems to be a little bit of a trend this year. I haven't watched a single mid-year freakout tag for 2023 that hasn't had a decent sized lump of regret in there. I mean, it's not like this tag is getting harder every year. It just seems to be that for whatever reason our reader trains are all collectively stalled at mediocrity station. And I for one don't particularly like that for us. And so what I've done, like many other booktubers this year, is change up my questions. Lots of these questions are the original questions from the original tag. I will leave the creators and the link down below. But a lot of them are questions of my own making. Questions that I'm asking myself, you know. Granted, most of them start with why, but some of them are fun. So without further ado, because any more doing is not going to make this list look any better, let's get on with it. Particularly because I am really inhaling cat hair and I've already penned myself. Look at that shit. Who trusted me to adult? Okay, so first up, question number 1, I have lifted directly from the delightful Gavin. Because if you can't read yourself, let a friend do it for you. The first question that we're going with is, how has your 2023 reading year gone so far? I was in search of a word to neatly sum this up, and the word that I ended up settling on was mediocre. My 2023 reading year so far has been underwhelming. So let's just look at the numbers for a second. At this point in the year, I have read 48 books out of my goal of 104 books this year. I think according to Goodreads, I'm about 4 books behind. And for that at least, I pat myself on the back. Somewhat awkwardly though, because I have a knitting related injury at the moment. It's called Get Your Tension Right, bitch. Considering the fact that I've had a really busy start to this year and I have been physically ill, like not chronically physically ill, but as in like viruses physically ill for quite a few months of the year. Despite all of that, I have managed to stay fairly on track with my reading. And there have been years in the past where that hasn't been the case. Take the pepperoni year for an example, which I know was an exception for all of us, but was a year where my reading up until September suffered particularly badly. And another thing that I am genuinely so proud of myself for so far in 2023 is keeping up with Around the Disc in 800 Days. In case you're new here, Around the Disc in 800 Days is a complete Terry Pratchett's Discworld read-along. It's run by myself and my lovely friend Kirsty, who you can find here at Melbs Reads. I'll link her down below in the description box. And considering that challenge has been 2 books a month and we're now into the variable length novels, we've left behind the trend of like less than 300 pages and we're heading towards 400 page territory. I am really pleased with myself. The Leanne of the past really struggled with consistent challenges like this, and part of that's ADHD and part of it's just that as soon as you tell me that I need to read something for a project, my interest in it goes from like 100 to 25 really quickly, and part of it's just that I've never run a project that's been this long before. I have kept up and I am absolutely loving it. I'm having a blast. But despite all of those things that I'm pleased about and proud about, if you look at my overall reading for 2023 and you take out the Discworld books, everything has been a severe hit or miss. Like, I think it's fair to say that there have been as many bottoms as there have been tops, and there may even have been more DNFs than either of those two, which makes for kind of startling numbers now that I'm keeping my own reading spreadsheet. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I seem to be off my mojo this year with picking 5-star reads. In my head, I'm not doing anything different. I'm still picking up books that I'm really excited about. I'm picking up books that are recommended from reputable sources like friends who have really similar reading tastes or just know my reading taste really well, authors that I've loved in the past, publishers that usually do things that are to my tastes. But for some reason, the numbers are still not adding up. There have been a few standouts in 2023, and in fact some of those were huge surprises that I will definitely talk about later. But just looking at the spread of my books on Goodreads does not particularly make my heart happy. A definite eye-opener for me was my series tracker spreadsheet video, where I went through all of the 90+ series that I was currently reading and DNF'd a whole bunch or completed off some that I had decided I was done with, you know, like I'd read up to book whatever and I was good, I didn't need more of the story. And I managed to whittle that massively down. But I also realised when I was making that video that I have a lot of really unhealthy habits when it comes to my series. Like keeping things for a rainy day or not picking up sequels as they come out because I don't want to run out of books in that series. Some of them again are going to be ADHD related things that I'm just going to have to continue unpicking away in the background. But some of them are like learned habits and I would really like to work hard to not have those anymore. And that was genuinely quite confronting. Like, as much as I loved filming that video, I am desperate to be able to film an update of it which has progress on some of the things that I have not finished. So yeah, long story short, it was a bad time and a big part of me doesn't really want to talk about it anymore, but that's what we're doing here today. We are freaking out about our mid-year reading. I am in fact having the correct emotional response for this scenario. Let's just carry on, shall we? After you. Question 2 on this list is, what is the best book that you have read so far in 2023? And for this, I did not even need to hesitate. I knew immediately what book that was. And it's a book that I haven't talked about yet on my channel. The best book that I have read so far in 2023 is a true crime memoir called About a Son by David Whitehouse. About a Son is a true crime memoir unlike anything that I have ever read before, and I have read many of them. And some of them are less well written and well considered. And again, when we're talking about true crime memoirs or any other kind of memoir, we are not critiquing that person's experience, but we're critiquing the art form in which it has been presented to us. And About a Son is a really unique take on this type of memoir. So essentially, About a Son is about the 2015 murder of Morgan Hayhar. He was a young man who was walking through an estate in a small town in England with his friends, heading to a Halloween party, and he was brutally accosted by a group of people who he had never seen before and who he had done nothing to, and he was unfortunately killed, as well as a few of his friends being very badly injured. And in the direct aftermath of Morgan's murder, his father Colin started to write a diary. But Colin was not an author. Colin was not somebody who ever set out to write anything in his life that would be read by other people. And so years after Morgan's murder, he forwarded his diaries to a journalist who had worked very closely with their family throughout the case. And she then forwarded those diaries to David Whitehouse, who was also a journalist and had published a few books at that point. And he then worked with Colin and the rest of Morgan's family to interview them and to piece together the feelings and the events with what was in Colin's diaries. And what this has produced is such a beautiful but such a deep and visceral look at what it feels like to be in this situation, to have this horrible news handed to you and to try somehow your level best to work your way through a system that wasn't designed for you. The system just wasn't designed to support victims' families, and unfortunately Colin was met with roadblocks again and again and again to get justice for Morgan. This book reached into me and rearranged my insides, and it's just such a necessary book to read for anybody who consumes a lot of true crime, for somebody whose hobby is researching cases and watching documentaries and reading these memoirs, because it is a deep dive into the way that the living victims of these crimes have to try and piece their lives back together. Without meaning to, it directly comments so much on the ethics of consuming other people's tragedies, whilst also being just so thoughtfully and so beautifully written. It is such a good book. I will be so shocked if anything knocks this off my #1 slot for my top 10 books of this year, because when I was reading this, it was all I wanted to do. It was the only thing that I wanted to pick up, and when I put it down, it was the only thing that was on my mind. The next question, the dreaded next question, is what is the best sequel that you have read so far in 2023? Now, as I covered at the start of this video, I have actually not read a great deal of sequels in 2023, and I will tell you for why. If we discount entirely Discworld, which I am not saying is not a tremendous achievement for me considering the way that my brain works, but if we take that out of the equation as like a big ongoing project, the other books that I have read this year have either been standalones or rereads of first books in a series so that I can try and go on and complete the series, but I've never actually got to the second book. I am actively stalled in the middle of a couple of sequels that I am planning on taking on holiday with me this week. And I say this week, but this is like Leanne of the past talking to you in the future. So by the time you see this video, I should be already gone and I should have already committed to all of my book choices. I plan to lock myself in a little cabin in the middle of nowhere with only the sequels that I need to read for company. And I am pleased to say that since filming my series spreadsheet tracker video, I have made a list of series that I would like to prioritise and get back to and complete off by the end of 2023. So hopefully absolute scads of accomplishments coming to a tops and bottom video near you soon. But until then, we're just going to have to content ourselves with the fact that I have read all of Lore Olympus that has been published in physical format this year, and that I also read the Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch duology graphic novels, and I technically finished off that series. It doesn't feel like a massive accomplishment right now saying it out loud, but I'm all about not regretting the choices that you've made in the past, but just trying to be like, well, those were things that I did and learn from them and move on. So we're just going to accept that the sequels have been an issue and we're going to learn from that fact and move on. And I'm also going to move on with this tag because I see more roasting on the horizon. And ironically, although we have moved on, we really haven't moved on very far, because the next question is a new release that you haven't read yet but that you want to, and both of the books that I have as an answer for this question are actually sequels. Go freaking figure. At this point, I'm just accepting that it is a sickness and that the only treatment is that I reboot myself and the way that my brain works. Anyway, the sequels that I would really like to get to this year are The Faithless by C.L. Clarke, which is the sequel to The Unbroken, and also A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I said that one really quickly because I've been talking about this one for a few months now and I've still not got there. You guys will have seen it by now from my TBR video that Amy and I went to an event with C.L. Clarke and Samantha Shannon at the end of May or the start of June, and getting to hear both of them banter back and forth about the way that they create their books and their very opposing processes for what they enjoy really ramped me up for reading these sequels, and that like burn and tingle about these books is still sitting in my back brain. So these two are really high up there on my priority list for the second half of 2023. And there are of course a ton of new release standalones that I want to get to, but if we started listing those I'd be here all day, so I will just say Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, mostly because I can see it on my thriller shelf here behind me because it's bright yellow. So yeah, that one. All of its many friends. Now, the next question is one that I am significantly more fond of. This question is, What is your most anticipated new release for the second half of 2023? And I don't think in all the time that I've been doing this tag on BookTube that I have ever gone with just a single book. I actually don't think I have the capacity or the capability to do that. So I'm going to give you a short list in more or less what we think is going to be chronological order. So first up, coming out in July, we have None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is about two women who meet completely at random at a restaurant. They are both celebrating their birthday, and after they get talking, they discover that they were born on the same day in the same ward in the same hospital. One of these women is a podcaster, and she's like, oh my god, this is such an interesting story, could I please interview you? And that interview leads to a weird tangling of their lives, in which the woman who is the podcaster cannot get rid of the woman who she has interviewed. Y'all know that I am a Lisa Jewell stan. I absolutely love her thrillers. We just won't talk about the sequel to The Family Upstairs and we're golden. Next up in August, there are 3 beauties coming our way. The first of those is the 10th anniversary edition of The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, which is the first book in her Bone Season series. In case you don't know about this unprecedented publishing thing that is happening, Samantha Shannon was actually given permission by Bloomsbury, her publisher, to completely revise this edition of this book and bring it more in line with her capabilities as a writer now, 10 years after she wrote it. Obviously, since she has written The Bone Season, Samantha Shannon has written a whole host of other books in that series, but she's also written Priory of the Orange Tree and A Day of Fallen Night, which are huge epic fantasies which have required her to do a lot of juggling with timelines, creating whole new structures, different ways of pacing and dialogue to reveal things. And she had long wanted to go back and revise The Bone Season to make it the thing that it could be in her head, and they've allowed her to do that, which is just so cool. So if you haven't read the Bone Season series yet and you're interested in it, please wait for this edition. Not only is it the one that Samantha Shannon herself would like you to read, but also the chief criticism that I hear about the Bone Season is that it is a little bit info dumpy, and Samantha Shannon herself recognises this, and this edition is not going to be. So I would say stick it out and wait for this. Then also in August we are getting Masters of Death by Olivia Blake, who is one of my favourite newfound authors. Masters of Death is very different from anything else that she has brought out so far. She seems to be one of these authors that has just like her finger in every genre, and I love that. This one is about a vampire, I believe, who is trying to sell a house, and there are poltergeists in the house, and so the vampire hires a medium to get rid of them, who happens to be the grandson of Death, but who also happens to be a fraud. There is a whole motley cast of characters attached to this one. It sounds very funny, it sounds very tongue-in-cheek, which is a big departure from the other things that I have read from Olivia Blake so far, and I am pumped for it. In August we are getting Vampires of El Notre by Isabel Canas. This one is a sweeping, romantic, cloying noir vampire thriller. All I know about this one so far is that it is set in a ranch in New Mexico in the 1840s and it involves a vampire attack. But if the cover for this is anything to go by, I think I am already in love. And then finally in October we are getting Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. Alex E. Harrow of course wrote The Once and Future Witches, which is one of my favourite books of all time and definitely in my top 3 witchy books. And she has produced a haunted house book. I want to know absolutely nothing else about it. I want to just get it and cram my face into it until I have consumed the whole thing, and then can tell you guys how much I loved it, because I have absolutely no doubt from the very, very early reviews that I am going to. The next question up is biggest disappointment of 2023, and for this one I really had to limit myself. There were so many contenders for this. I actually had to stop myself spiraling a little bit, going through all of the books that I had completed and really had not loved, and also the books that I had DNF'd so far this year. As I said earlier in the video, there are just so many options for this question and I am not enthused about it. But regardless of how I address that going forward, the 2 books that really sprung to mind and left a bitter taste in my mouth were First off, They Came to Slay, which is one of the 404 Inklings books. I don't have that one to show you because obviously I immediately unhauled it, but just for reference, this is the size of those books. And you wouldn't think that a book of this size could disappoint me as badly as this one did, but oh brother, it really did. The 404 Inkling series is an independently published series by a small Scottish press, and they are really sort of primers on topics from people who have an interest in them or a specific point of view. So for example, the one that I'm holding up is Sons and Lovers on Loving Male Survivors of Sexual Violence by Tanaka Mihishi. And They Came to Slay was supposedly about the queer history of D&D, but it was really intensely like reading an unedited undergrad essay. Every single tiny chapter started telling you what the point of the chapter was going to be, gave you a little bit of information, and then told you once again what the point of the chapter was, and it was really clunky and just not inspiring to read. And on top of that, the narrator did this weird thing where they both pretended to be a dungeon master talking to you about how our world was created at the start, and then just drop that and go on to straight factual stuff in the middle, and then would occasionally pick it up again to like remind you that that had been a style that they had used at the start of the book. And it was really cringy in a way that made me feel like if this was people's first introduction to D&D, they were probably not going to feel comfortable. And I hate that because it is such an interesting topic. D&D has such a vibrant queer history, and I feel like there really is a book to be written on this subject by somebody somewhere, but this one just wasn't it. The other book that I couldn't move away from this question without mentioning was The Companions. I'm temporarily blanking on the author's name, but either way, this is a short indie novella. It is supposedly to be a poly romance, but everything in this fell flat for me after the first maybe 10 pages. It follows a female writer trying desperately to break into the New York literary scene. She's running out of money, she doesn't know what to do, so she takes a job as a companion to a very successful male writer. And when she goes to his crumbling, like not very well looked after estate, she then meets his neighbour who he has a lot of sexual tension with, and then the three of them become a thing. And I am very here for polyromance. It was the reason that I picked up this book, but I got nothing from it. There was no heart in this book. There was nothing in it that made me connect to anything. I felt like I was just being related a series of events, like, and then this happened, and then this happened, kind of like the transcript of CCTV or something. And there should have been things in here which absolutely grabbed me by the throat. Like, there was a room which used to be a sitting room which has essentially been given over to plants. There were plants on every surface, and it was beautiful, and it was sunny, and he obviously wrote in there because there was papers on the floor. And even that romantic image did nothing for me. It stirred nothing in me. This is another one of those books where I'm like, the premise had so much potential, and in the hands of another author I think it could have been done really well, but this author just didn't quite have the ability to build believable characters enough that it would actually make you hooked on the story and push you through. So yeah, these are two of the books that make me the most meh, but believe me when I say there could have been others in this category as honourable mentions, and it wouldn't have been difficult to find them. The next question is your biggest surprise of 2023, and I actually surprised myself, no pun intended, when I realised what the answer for this one was. I mean, shocking all round to you guys and to me, but my biggest surprise of the year was Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. This is a straight up contemporary romance with a twist. So it is a romance which you know from the beginning is not necessarily going to end in a happy ever after or even like a happy for now. Everybody in this book is quite toxic to each other. We follow Magnolia and BJ, who have been together since they were teenagers. BJ cheated on Magnolia I think a year before this book is set, broke her heart and never really gave her any explanation. But the two of them are so codependent that they still spend all of their time together and they still sleep over with each other a lot and can't move on, which is then holding all of their friendship group back from being able to interact without this cloud over them and, you know, like watching what you say to what person at what time. And then of course what happens is new characters come onto the scene, and then the characters and the relationships have to progress because they are being compelled to by outside forces. I just did not expect to love anything about this one as much as I did. I've been on a quest in 2023 to find the right kind of book to read before bed, the right kind of book that's not going to have really high stakes or a ton of triggery things in it. I read a lot of books that are very, very dark, and during the daytime or when I am feeling in my best mental health place, that is totally fine. But in the evening when I'm kind of trying to wind down to bed and stuff, if I have these thoughts in my head, they then become spirals. So I've been trying to find books that are easier on my brain, and this was one of my attempts, which really, really worked. I was so invested in this story, and this is despite the fact that I hate BJ. I absolutely hate him, all of his choices, all of his decisions, everything about him. I find nothing redeemable about him as a person, actually, which is kind of unfortunate because he's like half of the point of view in this book, and it is a really long book. It's also like 400 plus pages, which was one of the things I was like, I don't think I'm gonna jive with this. But Jessa Hastings' writing is just so compelling. It's so beautifully written in some places that it actually made me stop and go like, shit. I just got so dug into Magnolia as a character. I wanted to see her succeed. I wanted to follow anything that she was doing, and yeah. There is a companion novel to this one, Daisy Hates, which is in the same universe, and you can see some of Magnolia and BJ in the background of it. And I'm told that the only concerns that I had about Magnolia Parks is fixed in that book. And so I'm still slithering about whether I do it or not, but I'm leaning towards yes, because I just had such a good time. Next up, we have got favourite new author, and that is either new to you or a new debut author. And honestly, this was interesting because despite how many books I have a memory of being like bleh about, it turns out that I have actually found quite a few new authors in 2023 who I am really keen to read more from. But the one that immediately popped to mind as soon as I read this question was Heather Fawcett. Heather Fawcett is of course the author of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is the first book that I read aloud to Harry at the start of this year. We both utterly fell in love with it. We were just so captivated by it. It is such a good book. Again, it reminded me of Marie Brennan's Lady Trent books in a really, really good way, but crossed with a bunch of other urban fantasy series and like the sensibilities of some of the girls from the Athena Club series. It was just so good. Listening to the two main characters in this bitch at each other for pages and pages and pages should have got old, and it just didn't. I am so excited for the sequel, so excited. This cover is also beautiful, and this is coming from a girl who's not really a fairy girl. Like, I don't do fairy books, and this one, it is so worth it. So here's where my questions deviate slightly from the original ones on the list, particularly because the next question is newest fictional crush, and let's be honest, I don't think I've ever had a real answer for that question. It's just like a lot of the other questions on the end of this list, not a very me question. So here's where we're going to switch it up a bit. The next question is a backlist book which has caught your eye. And while I am not wanting to get into the series discussion again, one of the series that I did spot when I was doing my tracker spreadsheet video was the Seven Waters series by Juliet Marillier. I have read the original trilogy for this, starting with Daughter of the Forest, but I have never ever finished. I haven't read the last three. Now, it has been a long time since I read the original trilogy, but I have quite a good memory for the books that I love, and I have a really clear memory of a lot of things that happen in Daughter of the Forest and the subsequent books. So I don't know whether this is going to be one of those I will re-listen to the first three on audiobook while I'm doing other things like knitting, or whether this is going to be let's just look up a recap and then jump in from book 4. But either way, for me, these are backlist books that have really got my eye right now that I would quite like to read before the end of 2023. Next up, instead of the book that made you cry, I am going to instead ask, What is your favourite genre so far from 2023? And for me, a thing that I am noticing more and more is that I am leaning right now into dark academia. I am leaning right now into obsessive books with a dark gothic atmosphere, with characters who are obsessive about getting to their goals but also obsessive about each other, and not necessarily in like a comfortable or healthy way. That could be a hangover, of course, from Magnolia Parks, but it's actually probably a hangover from two of my favourite books that I've read so far in 2023, which are Things We Do to Our Friends and The Cloisters. These two are two very, very different dark academia books. They do not at all do the same things as each other, and yet they both belong in that genre. And I think that's kind of special, finding a genre which has such a wide range of execution in it, where you're not just going to find the same book replicated over and over and over again. I'm looking at you, domestic thrillers, but where you can get the same atmosphere each time with a completely new cast and completely different plot. So I have a lot of dark academia on my soon to read TBR, and if that's something that you guys would like to see a video on, then please do let me know down below in the comments and I can see if I can hook you up with that. Next up, instead of the most beautiful book that I bought this year, because A, that question excludes so many, because there really are so many. I mean, like, we've just looked at Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, guys. But is it the most beautiful book that I bought so far this year? I don't know. I've also purchased more Library of Esoterica books this year. Arguably, these are really stunning covers. I don't know how I have managed in the past to pick, and I don't know how I would pick now. So instead, the question that I am going to ask is, what are your favourite covers so far from 2023? And for me, these covers go to the Scourge Between Stars, because the second that I saw this cover, I hit pre-order. I literally did not read the blurb. I hit pre-order, and then a couple of days later I was like, I should probably see what that's about. All I knew was that it was a sci-fi novella with this main character, and I was sold. Next up, I have, of course, that cover. We are talking about The Faithless by C.L. Clarke. A moment for this cover, and the screams and gay that I had when I first saw it. It's difficult not to just say that all other book covers are wrong. And then finally, I'm gonna have to also say The Cloisters, because in person, this cover is just so beautiful. And in fact, the minutiae and the details on this cover are so intricate and so compelling that I didn't actually realise what the overall image was, because I was too busy looking at all the little bits until really, really recently. Which actually happens to me quite a lot with like covers where there's maybe a silhouette of something hidden in it, or like there's actually a face but it takes you a minute. It takes me more like 6 months. I was never the person that could do those like stare into a pattern and see what the image is things. I was just like, lots of lines in it. Yeah, these three are definitely my favourite covers so far this year. And then finally, I am going to finish off with, what are your priority books for the second half of 2023? What are the books that you are going to try to finish, that you are desperate to pick up? What books are weighing heavily on your mind? For me, the books that really come to mind when I ask this question are, first of all, of course, sequels. So I'm looking at like finishing the Athena Club trilogy. I'm looking at finally reading the last book in The Daughter of Smoke and Bone after I picked it up for a reread and stalled midway through book 2, which is another one of my bad habits apparently. I'm also thinking about a few graphic novel series which I'm in the middle of, which would be really easy wins to get off of my spreadsheet if I could just actually get my act together to get to them. And finally, I think for me, getting to more of the first books in fantasy series, bringing you finally some of the I read the first book in this series so that you don't have to vlogs that I have been working on diligently in the background. Honestly, certain parts of this year have just not lent themselves to vlogging in any way. And one of the other things that I am planning on doing soon is taste testing the Locked Library subscription box books, which I have been getting for the last 5 months, I think. So I should have 2 sets of 3 for 2 separate vlogs. in the next month maybe, and I would like to also talk to you more about those and get through more of those, because I'm like a stringent believer that if you're getting a subscription box, it's probably a good idea to try at least and keep up with the books. I don't just want to collect them because they're pretty, and I also want to be able to evaluate whether I want that service going forward. So yeah guys, that's it for me. That is everything for my mid-year freakout tag this year. It's a little bit of a different one, but I have on the whole enjoyed it a whole lot more. I feel like we've just got more of a chance to chat than we usually do in a video, and I have of course once again got to lay out lots of the things that are wrong with me for you to enjoy. So if you have got this far through the video, then please leave me the pink flamingo emoji down below, because I really feel like it represents the way in which my failings this year have not been able to blend into the background but are instead standing there on one leg looking me dead in the eye. If you are new to my channel and you would like to see how I go for the rest of 2023, then please consider sticking around and hitting the subscribe button down below. And if you have enjoyed this video, then please hit that thumbs up, because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you guys soon. Bye!